I must be bored out of my mind or something because I'm doing another subscriber Q&A. What's that? It hasn't been 3 years since the previous one? My God. You better subscribe to the Twitch channel. Pronto. All right, for this one, I've leveled up as well. Previous one, we were using Notepad. Take a look at these sexy lower thirds with the questions on them. Boom! What is that? Okay, so Jid's question coming in first, who said, why won't you properly pronounce my name when I sub? Because I don't know what it is, because I don't know you personally, because I don't know how... okay, I have always pronounced this name, Jid. I think on Twitch it's Jid 2020. I assume it's actually JYD? Question mark? I don't know. I used to be quite good, I think, in terms of pronouncing most people's names correctly, but there's some people have just got unpronounceable names. I mean, your name is full capital letters with no indication of whether or not it's supposed to be an initialism, an acronym, a word that you've just decided to capitalize for some reason. Get off my back, okay? Get off my back. All right, let's take a look at the second one, though, where Jid actually followed up and said, how will the potential end of Overwatch League affect the view of esports to the casual viewer who just want to support their city team? And I think that the thing is here, I feel like the question is kind of conflating the casual viewer of esports with people who are already casually involved in Overwatch League. Most people casually involved in esports do not have a city team to support. That was actually quite I hesitate to use the word new because it was borrowed from traditional sports, but it was quite a unique idea in terms of esports that was one of the big reasons why a lot of people decided to get in on the ground floor of Overwatch League in case it succeeded. But let's break this down in two parts, right? What will the potential end of OWL do to the casual viewer's view of esports? Not much, just kind of continue the same trend of games don't last for very long, right? Most games are only going to have like a 10-year life cycle or a 5-year, somewhere between 5 and 10-year life cycle. It's kind of incredible if games go above that, at least without getting a big refresher, you know, like Counter-Strike. But at least, I mean, CS is one of those games I think that really has stood the test of time, but they still refresh it every now and then, right? Going from 1.6 or even whatever was before 1.6 as well. Into Source, into Go, into CS2 now, you know, games do tend to continue updating rather than just allowing you to play an old 15-year-old game and keep going. But yeah, I mean, some things have continued to exist like League of Legends. But I think overall, the trend of games not lasting a particularly long time and therefore it not being a very stable space to be in and space to invest into, it's just another point of evidence in that regard. And also, it kind of continues to highlight the esports winter that's happening right now, which is that there's a squeeze on all of these people involved in esports. They're not being able to monetize effectively, and things are being shut down. And Overwatch League is one of those kind of things that was already on really dodgy ground to begin with. It never really found solid footing. And so it's one of the things that looks like it's going to be leaving the space. And then the second part of it is, what about the people that just want to support their city team? Yeah, if Overwatch League ends up... There's another question later on as well about Overwatch Leagues. But yeah, if the people that just want to support their city team... do those people even exist, first of all? Like, I know that they did at the beginning of 2018 when the idea was first kind of invented. I know that a lot of people got into it because it was like, oh, there's a team from near where I'm from. That's awesome. It really did tap into that traditional sports vibe fairly successfully, I think. Otherwise, Overwatch League would have had far less fans because the marketing and the game and the esport itself, I don't think, warranted the viewership that it got, to be honest. But if those people still exist, what's going to happen to them in kind of an open circuit system where the brands disappear and stuff like that? I think they'll just go the way of normal esports fans, where they follow a player or move on to a different game or find something else in their life that they're interested in and continue just having the good memories from before. Let's move on then. This was a second part of Jid's question, which was, or rather JYD, I should say. I mean, just constantly mispronouncing their name throughout this entire beginning of the video. Will any esport in the future take the idea of Overwatch League and implement it again? And if by this you mean the city-based model, which is the biggest unique part about the Overwatch League, because there are many other franchise systems and partnership systems, and there are other things that we're planning on doing, you know, well, what it ended up being was just LAN events, not homestands. But yeah, the homestands and the city-based stuff was really unique to Overwatch League. Will anybody try that again? No, probably not. I think something that tends to get missed in the entire discussion about the Overwatch League is we didn't even get to see the shit show that 2020 could have been had homestands actually happened. COVID causing all of the Overwatch League to move online was devastating for the viewership numbers. But I would speculate that had 2020 gone to plan and we had constant traveling homestands, the organizations would have burnt huge amounts more money with all of the travel, all of the events that they had to put on, etc., etc. Those were not going to be profitable. They were going to cost a lot of money to put on. The players would have been unbelievably burned out, and there would have been uproar about the way that the travel was affecting them mentally and in terms of their sickness. This is before COVID even was introduced to the United States en masse. People were outrageously ill just with flu and other cold symptoms and that kind of shit because they were just traveling all the time. Their bodies were worn down, and they were, I mean, it was poised to be an epically dreadful year in terms of logistics and people's confidence in the idea to begin with. So apart from a few positives of like, yeah, it did draw in some initial fans at the beginning because people were really excited about having a city, and it immediately kind of shortcutted its way to building brands that people identified with, rather than having to put in the really hard work of actually building up content creation and players that people support and teams and history and all of that stuff. You kind of shortcut it by just saying, hey, we're from Houston, guys, you like us because we're from Houston, right? So apart from that aspect, all of the other stuff didn't really have too much merit, in my opinion. All right, let's have a look. A question from somebody else, which is No Man's Wharf, who, fantastic art whenever we do the Pokemon streams, who says, serious question for genuine purposes, which worries me. What is your favorite Pokemon? And if you can't choose one, give a few. Well, I couldn't choose one. I don't really think of things generally in terms of like what my favorite individual thing is. I just have some stuff I like and some stuff I don't like. That applies to pretty much everything I experience. But I went back through all of the original 151 Pokemon to try and look through the sprites and kind of tap into my brain of like which I had the most nostalgia for. And while kind of scrolling through them, a couple did stand out to me. I used to have a shiny Blastoise Pokemon card that I loved, and I had a Zapdos as well that I really liked. And I think part of that is because they were powerful and they're like, you know, either legendaries or big evolutions of starter Pokemon, and so I really liked those. I like my Gyarados. I think I had a shiny Gyarados too, but I can't exactly remember. But the two that stand out the most are definitely Blastoise and Zapdos. I think there are actually cooler Pokemon in Pokemon Infinite Fusion than any that have been designed. I think the sprite makers for Infinite Fusion have gone crazy dummy hard in terms of making Pokemon that just look fantastic and are amazingly designed. But in terms of the originals, the ones that I have the most nostalgia value for, the ones that I would label as my favorites if pushed, Blastoise, Zapdos. All right, let's have a look then. Next question from Sphinx. So we're gonna get into a chapter actually in this, which is media and books and stuff like that, because people have been asking me a few questions about that. So let's start with Sphinx's question here, which is, what's a piece of media that's influenced you throughout your life or career that you wish you had an opportunity to talk about but never have? So as I said, there's going to be a couple of questions coming up about books and stuff later on, so I'll save most of those. They were specifically, the later question is about childhood books, so I won't talk about books I read while growing up. In terms of other books that have made, I've read quite a bunch of fantasy and stuff like that, but I wouldn't say that it particularly influenced me throughout my life or career. I mean, little bits of it, like certain characters and the way they interact and that kind of thing, but I would say in terms of books, I have very much sought out books that are considered influential to try and look at the text. I'm talking like philosophy textbooks, you know, oh, not textbooks, sorry, but philosophy, literature, and what else? Classical works, that kind of stuff. Things that are culturally significant pieces that have been extremely influential in an objective sense to society. And I've read quite a lot of those and really enjoyed them, but I wouldn't say that those have been particularly influential, because I think the point at which I started reading those, I'd already got most of my like life ideas cemented, so they're only making small changes. In terms of the ones that actually had large influences on me, when I was in my really early 20s and I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I was at university and I was still trying to make a break into esports, and I was trying to figure out like who I was as a person as well, because previously I'd kind of been had some level of anxiety when I was a kid, and then really found a lot of confidence when I was a teenager, and then was depressed when I was at university. And so I was trying to figure out how all of this stuff kind of fit together, as any young adult is going to do. And I realized that YouTube is the most amazing resource ever created by humanity about basically any subject you can ask for. I mean, if someone recommends a book for something, someone's got a 10-minute video summarizing it, or going into an analysis of it that would be even more useful, or having a counterpoint to the book, or whatever it is. And then if you just extend that even further, I mean, there are YouTube channels on philosophy. That was one of the things that had a large influence on me as a young adult. Fantastic intros to topics that then prompted further reading into them. But the same stuff about literature, about history, about economics, and specifically the ones that, again, along with philosophy, the ones that I would say had a really large influence on me and the way that I think about the world were YouTube videos, channels, etc. about psychology and sociology, and just diving into what the evidence base actually says about how humans view the world and how we interact with each other and the best practices for doing that. I'm not going to name any specific YouTube channels because I feel like there's a ton of them out there. And actually, one of the ones that I liked the most during that period of time, which was, what, almost 10 years? Oh, yeah, something like 6 years ago at this point. 7 years ago, maybe. Yeah, about 7 years ago. That a lot of those YouTube channels have become very different now. They've focused much more on like relationship advice or stuff like that. Stuff that gets a bit more clicks rather than going through the kind of core big works of philosophy, psychology, sociology, that kind of thing. So I'm not going to give any specific shout outs, but YouTube's just an unbelievable resource. If you don't use it, if you're like a zoomer that just flicks through on your phone, which seems unlikely because you're literally watching this on YouTube right now, but I know for like my younger sister and her friends, they just Instagram Reels, the main source of like video content that they consume, which is so different because you're not actually seeking out what that is. You're getting fed it by an algorithm based on what you've watched already, but you're not actually going out there into the world and picking what you want to watch. You're not having your will be part of it and your interests be an active part of it. You're a passive participant in that. So anyway, if you don't use it because you do a lot of that kind of more short form content consumption, or you just use YouTube frivolously for entertainment's sake, or watching me, or any kind of light entertainment at the end of your job just to chill out, that's fine. But you are seriously missing out on one of the best resources the world has ever created, in my opinion. All right, let's have a look at the next question, which is this one. So this, like I said, is a similar question. It's from TJ for Kicks, who says, what books had the biggest influence on you growing up? So I said that I was going to save the like childhood books question, and I really had to think about this because it's kind of difficult to remember, right? I used to be a voracious reader when I was younger. I would say probably from the ages about 7. I mean, I read quite a bit before that, but really when I started getting into it hugely, probably from the ages about 7 to 14. After 14, I started getting into video games and YouTube and stuff like that a little more, and I dialed back the reading until I was in my mid-20s. But for a good, 7 years or something, I would read all the time, anything that was going. And I can't exactly remember most of it, but the ones that I do remember had massive influences on me. Okay, first of all, the horrible histories and murderous maths books. I was a nerd when I was growing up, when I was a kid, and holy shit, these books were it. These books fired me up to learn about the world around me, whether it be because of stuff like history, learning about all of the cool shit that happened around the world. I mean, Horrible Histories is fantastic for kids. It's humorous and interesting and informative, and doesn't shy away from some of the less pleasant details, obviously. Although it is still aimed for kids, of course. And Murderous Maths, I don't know whether people really saw this as much, but it was kind of like Horrible Histories. It was comedic and lighthearted, but it taught about much more interesting and real-world applications of maths. So some level of like, kind of like the Freakonomics books, although I know that there's a lot of problems with the actual stuff inside Freakonomics, but, you know, that kind of element where it's taking maths, applying it to the real world and giving interesting outcomes. Stuff like, you know, probability and that kind of stuff that kids are not normally shown the ways in which it has a practical application, and you get to dig into it a little bit. And I loved maths growing up. It was my favorite subject, so that was incredible for me. The other thing I think that probably had, if I had to name one book series that had the largest impact on like my my behavior or my internal like my internal personality, I would say it was probably the Artemis Fowl books, weirdly enough, which, if you're not familiar with them, these were like it was like a genius young child finds out that fairies are real, but fairies are actually like a hyper techno society that's hidden from humans, and various adventures occur. But as a young kid who was extremely nerdy and fairly intelligent, I loved the character because I felt like, oh, this is like, you know, what like a super version of me could be if there was fairies and stuff, and I was just a little genius running around doing all sorts of stuff. So I loved that aspect of it. I had maybe an inflated sense of my own intelligence at that point because I was a young child. But also I think whilst reading things like Artemis Fowl and many other things like it, probably some Sherlock Holmes and that kind of stuff too, I remember as a small kid, about the age of like 10, you know, prepubescent still, but as I was going through puberty, being very focused on emulating these kind of protagonists who are rational above all else and try to view everything through a non-emotional lens. And I think, looking back, that had a severe impact on my personality, because I still do that. I find it actually very difficult to summon up instant emotional reactions to things, which is a flaw sometimes as well. Like, I don't react very quickly to things that I probably should do. I need time to be able to like think them over, even if other people would immediately come to a conclusion much quicker based off their prior experiences or emotions. But I definitely think that reading those kind of books and trying, maybe subconsciously, maybe consciously, I can't even remember, to emulate those very like rational protagonist characters. You know what I mean? I'm sure you've seen the archetype before. In terms of some other books, though, that were on the other side of that, there are other children's books growing up that, like there was a book called Sharp North by Patrick Cave that dealt with the ethics around cloning. So the concept is that you follow this protagonist who finds out that she is a clone of a rich person, and basically she is part of a clone network that exists, allowed to live in the real world, and then kind of stolen away and harvested for organs should anything happen to the rich person. That's like the rough part of it. And I know that there's multiple books that have been written about that, but Sharp North is just the one that I happened to read because it was like based in the UK and happened to be in my local library. And that, along with Mallory Blackman's Noughts and Crosses series as well, are two that stand out to me, though I'm sure I read others as well, which were like large either ethical or social ethics situations baked into fiction narratives that made them very consumable for me as a kid, and internalize that, I think, probably to continue to influence the way in which I see the world and the way in which I view like ethical problems. I think I just got started on thinking about that kind of stuff through literature. And the other one that I would mention as having a big influence on me, not in terms of my personality or anything like that, but just in terms of my enjoyment for fantasy, was certainly Eragon by, what's his name? Christopher Paolini, I think his name was. I think he was like 15 when he wrote the first book. And honestly, for a 15-year-old, that is a banging first book. It's a very classic, not too original version of like the hero's tale in a fantasy setting, but some of it has really good elements to it. And for a young adult series, and certainly for the age that I was, probably about 12 or something when I read it, that is a banging series, and it really introduced me to the field of fantasy. Something that I tried to read Wheel of Time around the same period when I was about 13, and I gave up on it after the first book because I just thought it was kind of slow and boring. So certainly Aragon did a great job there of kind of introducing me to it and keeping me hooked. I want to take a look, though, at this follow-up question from Sind, who said, I read Wheel of Time partially because you mentioned it once during a stream or video years ago. Do you have any other fantasy books you've enjoyed recently other than Sanderson? Because that answer is too easy. And on top of that as well, just to follow up, there was another question that was extremely similar that was from Messenger One, who said, also, any recent book recommendations? So I'm going to talk about that. I mean, because Messenger 1 didn't specifically say it, Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson is a fantastic writer of fantasy. If you haven't read what he's written, I would highly recommend it. I think the Stormlight Archive series is probably the best, might be top 2. I would say top 2 fantasy series that I've read. And he has a huge range of other books that are also fantastic, and the way that he ties the world building together is really, really good too. But in terms of thinking about Sin's question, which was, do you have any other fantasy books you've enjoyed recently? I have been reading the same fantasy book series, rereading it for a long time now, probably for the last year, I think. Which is the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which is by Steven Erikson, and it's actually co-written, so not co-written in the sense of both writers are writing one book together, but both writers came up with the entire world, and then Steven Erikson wrote the main series called Malazan Book of the Fallen, and his partner Ian C. Esselmont wrote a bunch of... I wouldn't even call them side plots, actually. They are other plots that happen in the world that are as important, but just happen all at the same time. And the universe is small, actually, compared to something like Brandon Sanderson's. It doesn't span multiple worlds, though it does span multiple planes of existence. But you could think about it, as a fairly small, kind of like D&D-esque world. That has, Realm of the Gods and that kind of stuff, but it doesn't have many different planets involved, that kind of thing. But it's fantastic, and if you're planning on getting into it, it's extremely long, and I would recommend that you read them in the publishing order. Don't just... So what I've done, which I don't regret doing it, but I've kind of tried to fix it now on the reread, and I'm having more fun this way, so this is why I'm suggesting it. If you are planning to read that, and I would highly recommend it, first of all, set aside a lot of time. You're going to need it. And secondly, read them in publishing order. So it doesn't matter if you don't try to read all of Steven Erikson's and then all of Ian Esselmont's. Try and read them as they came out in publishing order, because that's the way that they're intended to be read. In addition, the question was, do you have any other fantasy books you've enjoyed recently? But I'm going to just take this in the Messenger One kind of way for any other recent book recommendations. I've been getting into reading a lot more poetry. It's something that I've wanted to do for quite a while. I think that it's also just useful for my job in terms of the creation of metaphors and expressive, emotive writing. Poetry is often fantastic for that. I know that Machine is very much into poetry, or maybe I'm overstating that, but I know that Machine at least has some interest in poetry. And I've been reading a couple of anthologies, that kind of stuff, and one of the books I've enjoyed quite a lot, not necessarily for the quality of the poetry, but for a different reason, is a collection by Chris Riddle. Chris Riddle is an illustrator who I love the style of. Absolutely fantastic illustrations, and used to do a book series that, again, I read when I was a child, and I can't even remember what the book series was called. Let me just Google it real quickly. But the book series I remember being quite good, but not one that I would necessarily want to go and reread as an adult. The Edge Chronicles, that's what it was. So it was a book series co-written with Paul Stewart and illustrated by Chris Riddle. And it was very good, very good. If you're interested in more of a young adult read of some kind of fantasy, then yeah, I'd recommend that as well. But his illustration style is fantastic, and he has a series. I've found at least 3 poetry books where he is illustrating the themes or some kind of imagery from the poem itself and then collecting them. One of the books is called Poems to Live Your Life By, I think, and something else like that. But you'll be able to find them. And one of the other books that I recently got was a collection of W.H. Auden's poetry, because I think it's particularly beautiful. So this follows on fairly nicely, actually, into the next question, which was asked by Daxa, who says, as the poetry reading little nerd who grew up to be a broadcast talent, do you think public performance will always be part of your life? No, I don't think so necessarily. I think that at some point it's, well, first of all, public performance wasn't part of my life between the ages of, like, I don't know, when did I stop reading poetry to the neighbors? Probably when I was like 5. So from the ages of like 6 until I was 19 or something, or 20. Yeah, so for like 13 years, I was not doing anything that was... Oh, no, I started when I was back 18, actually. I did comedy public performances when I was 18. But, yeah, there was a large segment of my life, almost half my life, where I wasn't really doing public performance. And I do it at the moment, not because I necessarily have a massive love for it, but because it's the best thing for me currently to be doing. I would also have a lot of... There are many other things in my life that I would find a lot of fulfillment through doing that are not based on public performance. But at the moment, those don't pay the bills, or those are multiple years away from getting to a point where they would. For example, I would really love to go into behind-the-scenes production at some point of esports or some other kind of live broadcast. Is that public performance? I don't think so necessarily. I'm not going to be the one on camera. It's more like crafting this stuff behind the scenes, but it still scratches the same itches for me. So I don't think that necessarily public performance is always going to be part of what I enjoy in life. It isn't currently all that I enjoy in life. So I can certainly see a world in which that's not the case. And the final question that I'm going to get to try and keep this one to about 30 minutes so that I can pump them out more regularly and feel better about them, is this one from Deluxe, who says... Will you give away a pottery piece to a lucky sub? Now, can you imagine what would happen if I put one of these into a box and decided to send it to you guys? Can you imagine what would happen? You would end up with shards. It would be like you were digging for Roman pottery in your back garden, because you would find little pieces everywhere instead of anything that resembled a pot. So, no, I'm not going to be sending pottery pieces to lucky subscribers. However, if you have an idea for a piece of pottery that you'd like to see made, I'm very happy to take inspiration from ideas. I'm not very good at the moment. I've only, just started really, but certainly if you have ideas, I'd be down to hear them. And, potentially if there was some kind of event that happened in Europe where I was... Actually, sometimes I only travel with carry-on luggage anyway. It is theoretically possible that I could bring one to an event, but the chances of it breaking, either with me bringing it there or whichever lucky sub bringing it back, they're fairly high. They're fairly high. Maybe when I have an enormous amount of homemade pottery in my house and I'm just trying to get rid of them, maybe then it'll happen. But as for now, I don't have any plans of it, because I don't want to do all of the rigmarole of shipping stuff and packing it full of enormous amounts of... what's it called, bubble wrap or stuff like that, and I don't really want to destroy them en route. That seems like a poor thing to do with them. Poor things. There are many other questions as well that I haven't had the time to get to. I don't want to make these an hour long every time. I want to make them shorter, a little more focused, and give me more incentive to pump them out on a somewhat regular basis, like once a month, that kind of thing, rather than once a week. Frankly, there aren't enough questions for once a week anyway. But yeah, I've banked some of them. I've still got another, 8 ready to go. I did 8 in this, I did something more like 10 in this version of it. I've got, 10 for another version. I've got one for, I've got a few banked up for a Valorant version as well. So, yeah, these will still be coming. They're easy to create. I was just lazy before, so we're going to try and fix that, okay? Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, but frankly, if you're watching this, I'm sure you already have. And yeah, look forward to some of the other pieces of content that I'll have on here. We'll see you later.